Hi folks, Dr. P here, and I'm going to try to talk about fundamental differences between video games and tabletop games, which is complicated because there are several different kinds of tabletop games that have their own characteristics. Board games are different from card games, which are different from collectible card games, which are different from role-playing games. And there's miniatures games as well. But I'm trying to focus on differences in function, not form. The form is a video game, it's electrons and it runs on your computer, and tabletop game, you can play it on a tabletop. So I'm interested in how things work, not what they look like or how they're created. Whether a game is electronic or not isn't the focus. I've talked about this before many times, but I hope this can be more or less comprehensive. The bottom line is this is a lot less difference than you might think. Many people are accustomed to thinking of video and tabletop games as vastly different, although less so than 10, 20 years ago. Sometimes they are, but often they're not, and not always different in ways that you might typically think. For example, storytelling. The big AAA list video games seem to be about experiences and storytelling, but many other video games are not. Many tabletop games are not naturally about storytelling, especially board and card games, but RPGs lend themselves to storytelling if you're so inclined. Storytelling is a big difference only between video and board and card games, not between all kinds of tabletop games. How about hidden information? Well, video games are natural for hidden information, but so are card games and so are role-playing games. It's a big difference between video and board games, yes. I think the most noticeable difference in how these games are created and played is to talk about Thoughtware versus Athleticware. This is two ways to contrast games. Athleticware relates to athletic-like requirements, physical skills. Those are usually sports or they're real-time video games, and that includes many of the AAA list video games. Thoughtware, I originally used the term brainware, relates to games requiring thought and little else, certainly no exceptional physical skills. Usually they are tabletop games and turn-based video games. So let's talk a little more detail about Athleticware and Thoughtware. Games that require athletic or physical skills, such as eye-hand coordination, rapid movement, precise movement. So most real-time video games, which use fine motor skills, the fingers and such, and most sports, which use gross motor skills, the whole body, for example. Esports in video games recognizes this facet of games. League of Legends, Dota 2, Call of Duty, and so on, they're all athleticware. There are brains involved, but it's mostly about doing things correctly, very rapidly, like 200 actions per minute for top-level StarCraft play. Many video games with the appearance of battle or even warfare depend on athletic physical skills for success, and that's nothing like real warfare, where thinking is very important for success. Physicalware could be another name for this. I remember as a kid playing tank war games in basements or outdoors where we threw objects at the toy tanks for our shots rather than roll dice. And we did it in real time rather than by turns. Video games use a different physical skill set, but is it fundamentally different? There are also physical tabletop games such as Snap and Lightspeed. American football is both athletic and cerebral, as are real-time games, but athletic is much more important than cerebral, even in a sport as coach-oriented as American football. Now, what about Thoughtware? There are several types and many ways to categorize them. For example, puzzles. They have more or less an always correct solution or several always correct solutions. I say more or less because video games involve athletic actions and may have minor randomizers, but single-player video games are usually puzzles. Then we have people who say all games are math. who like games like chess and checkers where there's no uncertainty except in what the opponent does, and you can account for that. There are games that are psychological, games about people, and there's a great variety of those. There's the element of yomi in games, reading the opponent's mind, reading the opponent's intentions and acting thereon. Some people play that way, some people don't. Clearly, you can make tabletop games that are largely Athleticware and video games that are largely Thoughtware, but you can see how each type naturally gravitates to its associate. Many video games can be converted to tabletop and vice versa. My video game Lou Pulsar's Doomstar, which is for sale on Steam, was originally a tabletop game vaguely reminiscent of Stratego, but much better as far as I'm concerned, much more fluid. Now, puzzles versus games. Keep in mind, video games tend to be puzzles, one human side against the game with an always correct solution. And the game, even with computer programming, becomes predictable and doesn't really do a good job of emulating a human. Speed runs in video games are possible because you've figured out the solution and then you go through it very rapidly. You still have to use your athletic skills, but you know what you need to do in every case. Tabletop games are more often actual games, or what I call opposed games, with no always correct solution and usually more than one human side. Now, this may be more a consequence of how the games are enjoyed rather than a fundamental difference in two formats. For example, video games tend to be played solo, one person sitting in front of a computer. Tabletop games tend to be played face-to-face in groups of people. So there are many ways to categorize tabletop versus video. The most important is Athleticware and Thoughtware. Thanks for listening.